We are AGB Investigative Solutions, and we are located in Chicago, Illinois, but we have a national as well as reach as well as a global footprint. We are a full-service security firm that is driven to protect your people, property, and data. We're the only full-service security firm in the Midwest that combines state-of-the-art technology with physical security to protect, again, your people, property, and data. And AGB uses these resources to address emerging threats that our clients face in the public and private sector. So again, my name is Tafir Gillespie Hamed. I'm the VP of Marketing with AGB. So if you have any questions or concerns, we can actually hear you with the Q&A. Johnny Tyler, our Chief Training Officer, he is heading the AGB Institute. You'll hear a lot more about the Institute in in 2018 as well as 2019. But he will be speaking to you about active shooter in particular. AGB, our training department, has provided training for educational institutes, some of the largest utility corporations in the U.S., as well as organizations. So we will provide you with a brief overview, but we can provide customized plans for your organization, no matter what the needs are. We're able to do so. So we will get started again. Again, our apologies for the confusion. We're going to work it back to the first slide. 1 second. Okay, so again, apologies for the technical confusion. We are having some tough technical difficulties right now. But Johnny Tyler, again, our Chief Training Officer, he will begin again and review, again, some of the overview of active shooter and who AGB is. Again, this is very high level, but we can actually perform a customized active shooter for your particular organization. So, Johnny Tyler, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Tafir, and thank you all for your patience, those of you that stayed with us during our technical difficulties, and hopefully that gave you an opportunity to reach out to some others and let them know the importance of this subject. And even if you have not, we're going to ask that you do that either right now or even at the end. This webinar will be made available for you to share. But some of the discussion topics is more pointedly than learning objectives, because it's not a full training or even a full explanation, but it is a skim of the surface of the subjects of an active situation. So AGB, of course, as you've heard, is a full service security guard company where we provide on the guard service with boots on the ground. We have cyber. We are also very proficient in providing drone surveillances as well as executive protection. And our training department is second to none. So we are now launching out with our AGB Institute that is certified by the state certified agency here in Illinois. And as you've heard already, we are nationally located. with a presence in more than 8 states with global footprints. So AGB is that organization that you want to follow up with. But let's just talk about our subject now. Uh, so we will define an active shooter. We'll just give you the definition of an active shooter. Focus on, we'll talk about or just make the statement. Hopefully at the end you'll see the importance of active shooter awareness training. The Department of Homeland Security have a model that is followed traditionally, nationally, or nationwide. It's known as the run, hide, and fight model. We'll talk about the importance of resistance. And then while there are no solid golden rules of surviving an active not to suggest that if you follow A, B, C, D, E, and F, you will always and you will definitely avoid or be safe in an active shooter situation. We can say that if you follow certain steps, you will minimize the risk and quite possibly save your life or the life of someone else. So an active shooter is defined as an individual that is actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and or populated area. But we also want to add that active shooters, so in your communities, in your neighborhoods, you have active shooters all the time. In some communities more than others. But so then what happens when you do not hear your situations? So what happens when you do not hear your situations being publicized or when it's not a big deal? It's because it's often not a mass shooting. So it goes from an active shooter to a mass shooting whenever four or more victims are involved. Now that's four more people that are injured and sometimes even have loss of life because of the active shooter. Four more excluding the active shooter himself. And so the Department of Homeland Security have identified an approach to this, which they call run, hide, fight. So the run, hide, fight model says that when you first become aware of an active shooter situation, you should run. You should get out of the way, seek cover. Then it says you seek cover when you are hiding. And finally, if there's no other option, the last resort would be to fight. However, you will find that there are many experts in the that also present training with other options that may suggest that fight may be the very first option. Running may be your last option. So it just depends on the dynamics and on the circumstances that occur, which will cause you to employ one or the other. And so with the fight model, which sometimes is a very first option, you will be interested in knowing that about 17% of individuals that are apprehended or whose plan is thwarted in an active shooter situation based upon by the citizens themselves. As a matter of fact, the largest percentage of individuals whose a plan or whose engagement as an active shooter, more than 13% of those cases ended due to the intervention of unarmed civilians. So that's why an active shooter training is beneficial to you. Only about 7% of those end with police intervention. Now we're talking about police intervention outside of the police having to actually shoot or take the active shooter. Outside of the police officers or the law enforcement, first responders neutralizing the threat, when it comes to actually engaging and confronting the individual civilians, 2 to 1 outnumber the success in being able to do that. And for obvious reasons, the civilians are already there; they're on the scene. You should have, if you're in an establishment, a business, church, school, any entity where large people gather, or even a few people gather and are there for long periods of time, you should have, or you should establish an evacuation plan, a communication plan, and also having the ability to administer medical aid. It's important to know that when the first responder, their primary objective is to neutralize that threat. So while there may be those that are wounded, they will not attend to them. They're not going to stop their mission or be distracted from their mission of first neutralizing that threat to engage someone that is obviously wounded. That's where you come in. So a good active shooter training is also going to be able to help you understand how to administer medical first aid before EMT arrives or before the threat is actually neutralized. Tourniquet and so forth. How to apply pressure wounds and these things are also very, very critical in an active shooter situation. Now, here's some statistics that should shed some light. Uh, since 2010, or since the year 2000 through 2017, there have been about 250 incidents of active shooters. That's right, from the year 2000 to 2017, 250 incidents. There have been 2,217 casualties, including those that have been killed and wounded, while 799 were killed in these situations. There were 1,418 who were actually wounded. Now, but the startling news is today, and we're just sad to report that since January 1 of 2018 through the period of June 2018 of this year, there have been more than 154 mass shootings. As a matter of fact, 177 as of June. The information that you see now probably is taking us through the first quarter. And so what is that saying? That's saying in this year alone, we are more than halfway reaching the mark of active shooters through the past 17 years. That's why an active shooter awareness training should be important. Those of you that are pastors that are listening to this, you should understand that you have a responsibility for your congregation to recognize that while God is with us and while we certainly have faith and we trust in the Lord, we also have to be practical in understanding that there may be a need for us to engage special training, especially if we have large churches, even small churches. But if you have a security force, your security force should be trained in active shooter. AGB Investigative Services, AGB Institute, and able to provide that type of training for you. So, once again, you look at the breakdown of the active shooter, you can see where they are occurring. 43% are occurring in the business corridor, while about 20% are happening on educational institute grounds such as schools. And while we know many of these are taking place at grammar schools, a lot, and unfortunately, as well. So schools, it's in your high schools, and it's in your college campuses. 14% happen in open spaces, and only to the surprise of some of you, only 10% are happening on public places such as government buildings, I should say government facilities or government entities, while the others are broken down in residences, houses of worship with 4%, and then your healthcare facilities sharing about the. So there is no area where you're say, well, active shooting won't happen here. Also, importance of training is evident in the fact that if you're trained, you have a frame of reference of what to do or how to respond to a situation. We all have we all have three innate uh, emotional reactions to being startled or to being surprised, the element of surprise, and that is we will either instinctively fall to fight, flight, or even fright. And fright is often not spoken of, and you hear fight or flight. But having my academic background in human development, I can tell you that fright is a very real emotion as well, and that causes you to freeze. For an example, if you look at this, the basic nature of some animals, such as deer, rabbits, and others, uh, when they are surprised, the element of surprise hits them, they freeze. Well, that trait is also innate in humans as well. And so, whether we are trained or untrained, when we're surprised by an element, there's the presence of being startled and fear. Now, the fear may be subtle. I mean, you won't be quote unquote frightened to death, but the element of surprise causes that adrenaline to flow. Once that adrenaline happens, you will fall into one of two areas. If you're trained, you're going to feel anxious, and you're going to feel anxious because you know now you're identifying what situation you're in, and you will uh, automatically reflect back to the training or the information that you have that's relevant to that situation. The untrained person will resort to panic because so many ideas are running through his or her mind that they're not sure what they might do. So the trained individual, while they uh, will be in a position to recall what they have learned, the untrained person will probably fall and more pointedly uh, fall into a disbelief. Is this really happening? Is this really occurring? The trained individual, they are in a position to prepare to act as rehearsed or to act as rehearsed, while the untrained person may find themselves lost in denial. This cannot be happening. The trained individual will commit to action, and while the untrained individual will also um, commit to, they may also descend into helplessness because they don't have that frame of reference. Now, descending into helplessness could also mean that they will commit to action, but the action that they commit to may cause other individuals or themselves to be even more endangered. And so that fight and that flight and that fright piece gets confused and in their thinking, and then panic, which we said earlier, may cause them, or is more likely to cause that individual to do some things that he or she uh, would have been better served not to have done. So the Secret Service is also now getting involved in active shooter situations, meaning that they're actually training on active shooter. They're actually going to various places. You can hire the Secret Service, but you can hire us. The owner, Mr. John Griffin Jr., his law enforcement background includes an investigator for the state, as well as having the experience as a secret uh, service detail for about 6 or 7 years. And so the type of training that build on that. And so while you don't have the Secret Service at your disposal, you do have AGB. So there are some basic and obvious overt signs of threatening behavior, such as hostile gesture or verbal outburst. Someone makes a verbal outburst, you're going to they're going to get your attention. You're going to stop, you're going to look, and you're going to process what's happening. Bullying, such as someone who's giving verbal direct threats, even their posturing, their body language, it could become threatening. Then someone who is animated in their behavior, such. So these are things that you can readily recognize. But with AGB and the Institute, these are not These are the verbal outbursts. This is where verbal outbursts fostering is not there. Just think, how many times have you heard or saw on the news when after an active shooter situation, while you may have some individuals who will say that that this individual was strange or that they acted in a certain way. How many times have you heard individuals that have actually said, you know, I never would have thought that he or she would have done such a thing. I never would have thought. They were always so quiet. They were always so. So these are uh, testimonies, or these are reflections of individuals who have known before they became an active shooter, and they saw no sign. Now, yes, there are some who, when you look back, they came from a troubled home, or there was a situation happened that was tragic, or maybe a divorce in the a family, or something else that obviously triggered it. But in many cases, there was no sign, nothing to suggest that this person would have committed such a violent and hostile act, such as a mass or becoming a mass shooter. AGB's training will help you identify some of the subtle signs that you can look for. And so, once again, that cannot be enough said about resistance. We said earlier that 14% of active shooters uh, are disengaged when they are acted upon or subdued by the victims themselves, and only 7% when they are subdued by police. And once again, this is without the exchange of gunfire by the police. So, when they are met with resistance, 40% of active shooters commit suicide. Now, sometimes that resistance is by the civilians themselves, and oftentimes it can be by the police. So when they're met with resistance, 40% commit suicide, 4% surrender to police, while 8% leave or flee the scene. 14% are actually apprehended by the civilians. 7% are apprehended. Uh, 23% of those that do not commit suicide are subdued by the victims themselves, are shot by the police. And 4% are 4% of the victims are actually 4% of the active shooters are actually shot by the intended victim. So those of you that have the concealed carry, or those of you that are in a situation, have a plan, and you can reach a stored weapon, that have proven to be very helpful in those situations also. But that's the lowest number. 4% are actually shot. So the the highest percent and the most impressive thing here is that when they're met with resistance, 40% commit suicide, and you're there on the scene, you can be part of that resistant team. And 14% are actually apprehended by the law enforcement or the first responders. And once again, this is why your training is so very important. So as we wrap up, I want to just ask you, have you been trained on active shooter awareness? If you have been trained on active shooter awareness, have you been retrained? And how long ago? You always tweak, you always come back and critique, and you always practice. We have fire drills in schools, and we have, staff development trainings, and we continue to develop ourselves in so many areas. But the active shooter is a growing one. And I think the statistics that would demonstrate that from 2000 to the year 2017, while we had 250 active shooter events already, up through June, there were 177. I know in the statistics it shows you 150 or so, but there's data that's out through June where we have 177 in America out of 190 nations that were analyzed. America had the highest number of active shooters. Right. out of 190 nations. 190. America, the United States of America, the land of the home, the free, the land of the free and the brave, or the home of the free and the brave. We have the #1 engagement of active shooter. You should be trained. So if you've been trained, have your organization, your school, your institute, your church, your company, your family. So there is no limit to who needs training and when and where you should be able to, because you never know when or where you may have to employ such training. Once again, active shooting situations are happening in our cities all the time. That was one incident that I often recall when I'm talking about active shooter. That's not a mass shooting. Once again, for it to be a mass shooting, you must have at least 4 victims other than the shooter themselves. But that was a situation where someone jumped out of an automobile on a city street and they opened fire. They were shooting at their victim, whoever they were shooting at. They had a target, but there were 2 young ladies that heard the noise. They heard the sound of the gun discharging, and they panicked. Once again, they went into fright mode. They went into freeze mode. So when they froze, one individual, after she surveyed and saw what was happening, it set in the reality. Oh yeah, this is really happening. And then panic, as we said earlier, set in, and they started to run. When she turned to run is when she got hit. And so, what might have happened different? When we're talking about active shooter in a city situation on the public domain, there's some steps or there's some things that you might want to consider outside, and in addition to the run, hide, and fight model. So if you want to hear more about this, and you certainly want to follow through and contact us, we can be reached at AGB Investigative Services, 773-445-4300. My direct email is on the screen. You can see that, johnny.tyler@agbinvestigative.com. I will be happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much to Johnny Tyler, our Chief Training Officer for the AGB Institute. We welcome any questions. Feel free to text them now in your Q&A box, and we will happily address those. If you want to see this recording later, we will have this available on our YouTube page, and you can find us under AGB Investigative Services on YouTube. And we will also post this on all of our social media channels. And if you aren't registered for our email distribution list, please email Johnny Tyler at the email address that you see on the screen so that we can get you registered. Thank you again. We apologize for the technical difficulties. But feel free to join us for our next webinar that will be coming up in the next month or so, and we will send more information out on that. Again, thank you again for sticking with us throughout our technical difficulties, and you have a great day.